Hello and welcome to our inaugural episode of PASA, a special series produced by Pan American Strategic Advisors to discuss, in an informal setting, some of the most pressing issues and current events that are going on in the Americas and provide insights into what they mean for geopolitics, business, and current affairs across the region. I'm joined here today by Ernesto Fiocchetto, one of our Pan American Strategic Advisors who's currently in Argentina and has focused a lot of time, a lot of his career working on questions of immigration and irregular migration across the Americas and worked with the Organization of American States on some of these issues, as well as Emmanuel Ohiri, who was recently at the International Migration Review Forum in New York City at the UN, which is what we're going to talk about today. Migration has really taken center stage, not just in the United States, where it's captured the political cycle almost entirely for the past decade, but across the globe. And that's kind of the groundwork that we're looking at when we start talking about where we are in terms of international affairs and international responses to migration. But while I'm sure a lot of our listeners have an idea about what's been happening within the US context, I think important to understand kind of the broader global situation of where we are with migration. Ernesto, could you tell us a little bit about what's going on, both within the Americas, but more broadly as it relates to migration in the world?
Yes. Well, it's great to have this conversation. Really excited about it. But especially because now migration is one of the hot topics in the global agenda. I mean, it's not only in the US or in some countries. I think it's something that we are discussing everywhere. And I think that this migration review forum that took place last week was was very interesting because on the one hand, it was a schedule, it was part of the plan that we should have a review of the Global Compact on migration. But on the other hand, it comes in a moment where migration is extensively discussed, not only in the US, as I said, but it overlaps also with the modification of the CIAs in the European Union, no, with this new pact on migration and asylum that is it will take effect in June this year. It also, I mean, I'm now focusing in the Americas. There are many countries like thinking what are they going to do with their own migration policy. You know, Argentina, Chile, the Northern Triangle, also Colombia is also like debating these kind of things in this electoral environment. So we are in a moment in migration where there are a lot of questions, a lot of narratives, and from my perspective, just few answers.
Thank you, Ernesto. That's really helpful to kind of put us within that broader context. Emmanuel, as I mentioned, you were at the International Migration Review Forum. Could you share a little bit of some of what different countries' approaches were, both within the Americas, but also some of the broader global themes that you saw emerging from the region?
Yeah, there was a lot that was interesting that developed at the forum, and specifically starting with the region, we heard from a lot of Latin American countries. Overall, we saw this support of the Global Compact for Migration, whether implicitly or explicit reaffirmation of the compact. Mexico highlighted its proactive role in migration governance, focusing on the most vulnerable women, children, and the elderly, and focusing on stepping up local action to eliminate barriers for services and integration. Uruguay highlighted itself as a champion country for migration that highlighted a lot of its successful initiatives, its leadership in the South American Conference on Migration, and also how it's been able to support families and children in their integration in Uruguay. Brazil similarly focused and committed on 11 national pledges. And Ecuador emphasized its role as a triple country of origin, transit, and destination, and just looking at its importance in the process and the regularization of migration. Of particular highlight, though, were Cuba and Venezuela. And what was interesting with Venezuela is that after the operation to exfiltrate Maduro, we saw this shift, or I noted this shift in how Venezuela approached its UN interventions. Prior to the operation, Venezuela really looked at the antagonistic relationship with the United States. Post the operation, it's much more toned down. They didn't really mention, how the United States is necessarily unfair or unilateral coercive measures, and rather they highlighted their success of their return to homeland plan, which is, you can say, is in line with some of the Trump administration's efforts to reintegrate refugees and migrants into their home countries or even third countries. But they also did mention how that migrants should not be seen as threats, criminal offenses, and this broader destigmatization of migration. Moving on to Cuba, conversely to Venezuela, they did actively condemn the United States, looking at their unilateral economic blockade as a reason for underdevelopment and poverty that has caused great migration pressures in Cuba. And went as far as to say that the United States is actively using migrants as political pawns. And so this also then plays into the larger global conversation about how refugees are integrated, and then where do they go after the fact? Should they return to their home countries? And we're seeing this clearly with the United States, but also interestingly with Europe, there is also this great push to push origin countries to re-accept their migrants and refugees. And it's interesting to contextualize this because despite the tensions that we're also seeing between Washington and capitals in Europe, there's still alignment on all of these global issues that we don't think about. And so despite the tensions that Trump is stoking with some European partners, it seems evident to me that there's still alignment on some of these issues between the global North and global South divide.
Thank you, Manuel. It's a really good point highlighting that despite the tensions in the transatlantic relationship, there's still a lot of parallels in the policies that they're pushing. And yeah, there's definitely been a shift in how Venezuela has approached the United States. It's hard to forget Chavez's comments at the UN where he walked on and said, "Oh, I think I smell sulfur," referring to George W. Bush. Chavez was around for quite a while. It's really interesting that we talk about remigration. I just want to read this quick quote from the U.S. Department of State because this is what they noted was their goal is not to manage migration, but to foster remigration. And it does seem to be a point that not only are we seeing within U.S. politics and within Europe, but we're also hearing a little of this from other Latin American countries. Ernesto, you earlier this year wrote a piece about how post-Maduro Venezuela, there's this kind of interest in returning Venezuelans to Venezuela, but that's not always an easy situation. Could you tell us a little bit about that article and why it's so difficult for people to return to their countries of origin?
Yes, of course. I mean, first, I'd like to say something just to situate this in a context. I mean, voluntary return has been like one of the big goals, one of the three solutions of the refugee regime, blah blah blah. No? And I think it's fantastic. I mean, that would be that's great. I mean, as a point. I don't like to talk a lot about remigration because I think it has also some ideological connotations. But I think that this idea of voluntary return is something that we need to continue discussing. What's the problem? And this is where the article that you mentioned comes. Is that yes, of course, it's not easy. I mean, just look at my last name. I'm from Argentina. I'm Fiocchetto. Migrants do not return. No, I'm the grandson of Italian migrants and Spanish migrants. No, that's part of the story that the history that we sometimes we forget. But that's true, and also I think that our politicians and I'm not talking only about the U.S. There is like this global idea of this, especially even in my article. I do not discuss a lot about the U.S. policy, but some Latin American countries who said, okay, now Maduro is not anymore in Caracas. You can go back to your countries. We're gonna miss you. No, that's not how things work. No, there are Venezuelans who have been living in other countries for 20 years, 2 decades. There are kids who migrated when they were 2, 3 years old, and they have built their whole life there. No, with their studies, they have a family. They have so it's not that easy. The voluntary return. I think that voluntary return can be very well No, it's easier when there is like a very specific issue that do not last for long, but it can be solved easily. I don't see Venezuela as a place, for example, and same situation with Cuba. No, if we think, I mean, we are based in Florida. No, if we think of Cubans going back to Cuba or Venezuelans going back to Venezuela, I think that may happen in a lot of time in a very different situation, and it will be also not very beneficial for Miami, at least, you know. So there are many components there that we need to consider. And I think here, and it's probably something that we are going to discuss later, there is a big gap between the discourse, what we want to say, what we think brings out votes and social support, and what can really be done. I don't know if that makes sense. No, there is this gap between the political discourse and what we can really do with migration policy.
Thank you for that conversation about how remigration versus voluntary return are such
Yeah.
different ideas, right? Remigration is often at least implied that it's forced, especially right now with how it's being framed. While a lot of people would like to be able to return home, there are a lot of challenges for that, right?
Yeah.
People have lives wherever they've migrated to. Um, Emmanuel, you noted that when Cuba's intervention, they talked a little bit about how the United States is creating these root causes, right? Exacerbating them. And I wanted to flag one of the things that we're looking at Pan American Strategic Advisors is how some of these root causes are being exacerbated by current migration policy, right? Deportations, cutting of aid, climate change isn't going anywhere. All of these root cause problems may actually be exacerbated by these influxes, right, of deportations to countries. While aid is being cut. So creating those opportunities, we've seen a real shift in that space. Um, Shifting gears a little bit, and we'll talk more about that gap that Ernesto mentioned. Um, One area that the Trump administration has taken a real keen note on is highlighting their disagreement with regional and global institutions. So Christopher Landau, the Deputy Secretary of State, kind of in response to and in their rejection of the Global Compact on Migration, which seems to be the one area where there's a lot of media coverage on this issue, noted that the whole point of multilateral institutions is to advance the interests of sovereign nation states. But lately, such institutions seem intent on undermining the very sovereignty of the nations that created them. Um, why should we be looking to international institutions for solutions to migration? This has been something that we've seen not just at the UN, obviously, but we've seen multilateral approaches to immigration in the region as well through the LA Declaration on Migration that came out of the Summit of the Americas in LA. Those have all often been rejected. But why are we seeing this kind of pushback, do you think, Emmanuel, to global governance more broadly from this administration?
To touch on that, I would also like to connect with Ernesto's last point. I believe that the Trump administration is promoting an intentional misunderstanding of global governance, whether it's the Global Compact of Migration or the United Nations at large, because the bedrock in the Global Compact for Migration and for the majority of many outcome documents for the United Nations is national sovereignty. The Global Compact Migration affirms the decision and the authority of nation states to manage their own migration plans. For financing for development in Sevilla, it affirms the national authority to devise their own national development plans. And so that's the bedrock of the United Nations systems. And there's also a further conversation about, is that, still underwriting of sovereignty necessary? Is that maybe one of the limiting factors of some of these issues to, seeing progress? But before getting into that, the Trump administration is promoting an image as if these global institutions are trying to undermine sovereignty, when that's not necessarily the case. And when it comes to issues like remigration, that's one of the objectives of the Global Compact for Migration. Objective 21 is cooperate in facilitating safe and dignified return, readmission, as well as sustainable reintegration. And so when the administration is saying they're treading on our sovereignty or our goal is remigration, one, it's either they haven't read the compact, or two, they're trying to create a narrative around what it actually isn't, to detract political will away from it. And so, to your broader question about why we need global institutions, is because the solution to the issues that validly the American state is facing, that Venezuela is facing, that Cuba is facing, that Europe is facing during its 2015 crisis, is we do see these global issues, whether it's conflict, whether it's climate change, that push people away. And so we need to have a coordinated effort in order to manage these issues. And that's the key, the coordination, because not one state is able to manage it alone to produce the ideal effects. And when they do try to manage it alone, we usually see the securitized approach, border controls, visa controls that restrict migration and exacerbate the issue by creating irregular migration. People will still move, but now it just makes it harder, which makes it more violent on the migrant, and it also prevents the state from better track, to better receive these incoming individuals, which also then creates another issue, which I think is very important to highlight, that you're missing out on the benefits of migration. And this is something that the United Nations also tries to highlight, is that when used properly, when leveraged properly, migration is a tool. And I would just like to reference one quote that I particularly tried to note down from the forum. It was actually from an African country, from Kenya. They said, migration can be an opportunity or a catastrophe. And that really just encapsulates the whole thing. Many countries, particularly from Africa and the Gulf, are also talking about just how much money they've been able to receive in remittances, in the billions of dollars, from labor migration, from educational migration. And so when we're looking at trying to fund domestic programs, domestic development, whatever else it is, or if we're trying to solve climate migration, address the root causes, it all takes this coordinated effort through multilateral institutions so we can genuinely benefit and manage, the key word, manage migration, for all member states to be satisfied and benefited.
Can I add a couple of comments here? There are two things. I think Emmanuel framed it perfectly. The global compact just try to push for the state sovereignty, and that they can make their own decisions. Indeed, there are many critics to the global compact saying that this is the weakest point of the compact, that at the end they are saying a lot of things, but given that it's kind of weak, no? It says at the end can do whatever they want because they try to respect their sovereignty. But there is something else that is absolutely technical. This is not a treaty. It's not binding. No, and indeed, this is not the first time that we have this discussion under Trump administration. In 20, the Global Compact was approved in 2018, but it was, the US withdrew in 2017, even before the compact was drafted, was finished. US immigration law was not affected by this. No, the US was able to do what they thought was better in Trump administration and in Biden administration, who, by the way, they accepted the compact again. But these are non-binding documents. So this is, and I think that this stress Emmanuel's argument on that they are trying to, I don't know if confuse or create narratives or try to raise points, but I think that this is not a discussion on the content of the global compact, but on the context probably, or the ideological scenario that we have today. And the other point that I want to raise, why do we need multilateral institutions, or why? Can just one country solve migration problems? Well, the answer is no, and it has been, but because I think that, again, Emmanuel, like a fantastic point here, but there is something else. Migration is transnational. We are talking of people going from one country to another country. So here we have that causes of migration are transnational, that flows move through multiple jurisdictions. Just think people coming from Venezuela to the US. You need to cross all Central America and Colombia. and Mexico as well. So um, I mean, when we speak about enforcement, there is also a thing there because if I want to do something in my country, it will have some echoes in other countries. If I close the borders here in Argentina to the migration flows from Bolivia and Paraguay, as they are discussing or they are pretending to do, well, that will have a big impact in, I don't know, in Chile, for example, because this is part of the like the via, the camino that these migrants take. So migration is essentially transnational. So it's impossible to think that we will have a solution just from one side. And my last point here, just to show some kind of um, let's say, contradiction is that, I mean, what are the solutions that the US are suggesting here, that this administration is suggesting? Mass deportation, third country agreements, border militarization. How can you do that if you do not have at least some kind of multilateral or at least bilateral connections? I mean, for deportation requires cooperation of receiving states. Third country agreements, for example, with El Salvador or Guatemala, there are bilateral deals. Coercing Mexico in border enforcements is a form of burden shifting that depends on Mexico's participation. So there is like a contradiction there. No, we don't want multilateralism, but at the same time, we need it.
I think you both raised some really good points on kind of the state of multilateralism. I know the Trump administration has been big on saying that they want multilateralism of like-minded countries and nobody else, which has been a little bit of a challenge. We saw that with the Shield of the Americas summit, or they prefer bilateral agreements because a big part of that's it's a lot easier to negotiate two parties, especially if you're the more powerful person at the table or the more powerful country. You can seek a lot more concessions. Um, I think this point, though, about sovereignty that you guys made is really important because not only at the United Nations, but this is one of the focal challenges within the inter-American system as a whole. Sovereignty has always been a pillar of the Organization of American States, not about U.S. sovereignty, mind you, or of the global North sovereignty, but also in the defense of the sovereignty of smaller states, right, against imperialism, against intervention within those countries. So there's this weird dynamic where we're seeing kind of a shift of who's worried about sovereignty at this moment in time. Emmanuel, I wanted to kind of go back to this point, though, that you raised about the benefits of migration, because I think it's something that we don't hear enough about anymore. We've kind of heard about the negative side of migration a lot, but not the positives. Especially at a time when the current administration in the United States is pretty concerned about um, the decreasing birth rate within the United States, right? We've seen challenges for other countries. We've seen declining populations, and migration has always been a solution to that for the United States, to have more young people coming into the country. What other benefits do you guys see that are real challenges going forward as migration starts to reverse or we see these deportations, not just within the United States, but for countries across the region?
To just jump in there, I think there are, I mean, there's the clear economic side of things that we're missing out on. In 2023 alone, there were estimates that immigrants in the United States paid upwards of $600 billion in taxes. That's real money that can be used now for the defense budget, for to really make the argument for the neocons, right?
Or to pay
But
down the debt, right? I
or
mean,
the,
the other thing
or
the
to pay
Trump
down the debt.
administration's worried about. Yeah.
Right. But that could pay for infrastructure, healthcare, education. And so we're losing out on that economic engine. Two, I think we're also losing a little bit of the American identity. We are a nation of immigrants. There's no other way to slice it. We are, call it a melting pot, call it a salad bowl. America is founded on the ideas of welcoming others for opportunity, for safe harbor, and for the betterment of all. And by actively targeting and attacking immigrants as the manufactured boogeyman for all of our national problems, our domestic ailments, is problematic, I believe, for the American spirit and the American dream. And so we're losing out, of course, on the economic part, but also I think it's antithetical to the American ideal.
Thank you for that, Emmanuel. Ernesto, go ahead.
Mm.
Oh,
No, no, I'm okay.
oh. Um, kind of shifting gears a little bit. Could either of you provide any examples of really good policies that we're seeing on the immigration side? Ernesto, I know you mentioned that several countries in the region are rethinking their immigration policies at the moment. Are there any, and Emmanuel, you mentioned, Uruguay and Brazil kind of frame themselves as best practices within that. What are there good, what would you guys say are the best examples of countries where we're seeing positive migration policies? And could you give an example of what those look like? Ernesto, why don't we go to you first?
Okay, well, that's not an easy question. I mean, I think that the examples that Emmanuel brought are really good. Um, I mean, of course, we can talk about Spain here, because they made this decision of regularization migrants that they suppose or numbers. I mean, that they are thinking it's about 500,000 people. We don't know if that's gonna be the number, and it has to do. I mean, it's not only just legalization of migrants. Also and it has to do with people who have integrated and know the language. From my perspective, is it's a law that is specifically targeting in a good way Latin American migrants, and it's kind of um, jeopardizing people from the MENA region to be able to get this opportunity of regularization. But I think that's another discussion. So I think that that's a good point. I think that it comes from a very simple logic. They say, okay, they are already here, they are integrated, they are working, but they are not paying taxes because they are not included in the system. So, okay, just let's breathe deeply and let's say, okay, this is going to be beneficial for our country because it is already beneficial. Mm? I'm oversimplifying probably a much more complex situation, but I think, and for sure, there might be some other complex. I'm not saying that this is a perfect model to follow, but I think it's pretty smart, and it has jeopardized also like many of the or challenged many of the European countries' perspectives. No, so that there has been some tensions there. That said, and I don't want to be, I mean, I don't want to move from the answer, but I have to say this. I also see these kind of answers embedded in these ideological tensions that we have in the world. No, based on this, Sanchez is the prime minister of Spain is showing himself as like the opposition, let's say, to this international um, a conservative movement. No, so I also have that question probably because I don't know. I also think that I mean, what is behind these decisions? For sure, there is something that it's necessary and good, and it's beneficial. It will be beneficial for many migrants. But what else is there? No, I also see like this political tensions and political gain behind these decisions.
Thank you for bringing up that ideological component because I think that's an interesting thing for companies and individuals who are looking at migration policy right now is what happens when the political pendulum shifts. We're having a lot of conversations about that within PASA about security policy, migration policy. Sometimes the multilateral system is designed to help kind of navigate those political shifts, right? And I think we're seeing some real challenges in that space when, one administration takes an action and 3, 4 years later, 5 years later, depending on the country, you see a political change. Emmanuel, since you were in the room, are you starting to see any of those blocks develop within these conversations between kind of the more global conservative and global progressive movements, or are some of those divides still much more defined by global north, global south, broadly speaking?
I think broadly speaking, we are seeing the global north, global south is still, the pervasive blocking in a lot of these development, security, transnational issues. But you might be able to say that we are in a post global north-south divide space in that the global south divide is still very much present and influencing the state of affairs, but we are starting to see the emergence of new groupings, new ways to approach relationships. I think we're seeing rather than just global north, global south, and also rather than far right blocks and progressive blocks, we're also seeing regional blocks being a much more prevalent organizing factor. Of course, the Gulf region is playing a huge relevance right now on the global stage. The Western Hemisphere, Latin America, of course. Europe is trying to have, there's this huge unification effort given some of the strains of the transatlantic relationship. So we're seeing this regional organization. But I will also highlight there is that kind of global progressive grouping versus that global right grouping. And I think, especially in the Latin American or the Pan American context, we're seeing the United States and similar or sympathetic countries also come into that kind of far right bloc, whether that's Argentina, now, with Venezuela, however you want to characterize the relationship between the United States and this interim government. But also on the progressive side, we are seeing mentioning Spain again, like Ernesto said, we are seeing this kind of tie between Spain Sanchez and Mexico's Sheinbaum, specifically on the issue of migration and this kind of the European Latin American connection as it came to colonization and immigration between the two. And so there is some working groups on that, but I still think that the older forms of organization of the past, global north, global south, are still very much present, especially when it comes to issues that affect like the national development of these countries.
Sorry, something here. I mean, I agree. I absolutely agree. I think that both points here. I mean, the global north, global south thing is still like the framework that we need to consider. Also, the regions and the regionalization of responses is interesting. But coming from the south of the Americas, I also see how this ideological thing is also jeopardizing this regional um, agreements. No, I mean talking specifically about the Mercosur and the policy. Yes, the policies that in Argentina they are discussing on migration. No, so I mean Mercosur is Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, and now starting in 2024 Bolivia. So you can travel from one country to another just showing your ID. Period. You don't need a passport. You don't need a visa. You don't need anything. So if Argentina wants to block some of these migration flows, well, what happens with Mercosur? So these kind of discussions is going to be very interesting to follow these discussions to see how things are going, and again, to what extent this is just a discourse that is that fits the international place Milei wants to occupy in this world, or if this is going to really become a law in Argentina and ultimately destroy at some point like this regional market that is the Mercosur.
It's a stark contrast with some of the conversations that you hear when it's all about the United States. So thank you for highlighting how Mercosur could be impacted by these as well. Just to kind of wrap up our conversation, with the UN Global Compact on migration, what would you guys, each of you, in a few sentences, just tell me, what do you see as the future for migration? Is there a multilateral path forward, or are we going to continue to see this tension between migration, sovereignty, and global governance in the next, say, 10 years?
To start, I do think we're going to still see the tension. Um, because I think it's an inherent part of it. Ernesto mentioned earlier that migration is inherently a transnational issue. And so when we're having the flow of things, whether it's people, goods, ideas, through borders, that is going to cause a level of tension, is going to cause conflict. And of course, if you have, leadership in a country that is more cosmopolitan, if you will, who's more welcoming to that transnational reality of things, we might see less tension. But then also we see this pendulum swing to the other side when we get to more protectionist or conservative countries and their leadership, where we see that kind of really butting heads and clashing when it comes to these transnational flows. And I think that's always going to be a part of it. And as we endeavor for more integrated systems of global cooperation, sovereignty is going to be the baseline issue, right? The European Union faces this when you have this macro system that is trying to regulate many different countries, and whether it's the United Nations trying to impose, or not even impose, but trying to advance resolutions for sustainable development, countries that don't want to be party with it, they don't have to, because a lot of these things are non-binding. That is to say, despite my belief that we're going to continue to see these tensions, I do think that the route of multilateralism, or at least some people are calling it mini-lateralism right now, or some sort of international cooperation, is going to continue. Exactly because, like I said, and like Ernesto said, these are transnational again. So because it's transnational, it's going to cause issues, but because it's transnational, it's going to require some level of international relations, whether that's just two parties, bilateral, or more, because these are issues that fundamentally cannot be handled by one country, try as they might.
Well, I absolutely agree with Emmanuel's argument. I just want to add 2 points. The first one is that, well, I mean, to be honest, there are many scholars talking about the end of the refugee regime as we know it. No? We will see how and what will come next, because now I come back to these ideas that we have been discussing. Migration is essentially transnational, so we need something. There will need to be something, even if this regime is, I don't know, is destroyed at all. I don't think that's going to happen, but I mean, to be honest, we have to say that many people are discussing this, and we see some signs. No, we see several countries like withdrawing international organizations, etc. No, there's something going on there that we need to see where things are leading us. The other point, and I will highlight again the ideological dimension of this, is that I think that we still need to pay attention, close attention to, I mean, if whether these leaders in the world succeed or fail in other aspects of their country's political life. And I will go back to the example of the Mercosur and the Southern Cone of the Americas, because that was not an issue. Migration was not an issue until now. I mean, we haven't discussed migration a lot in the last 20 years. It has not been a problem. So we have created this problem. We have framed the problem. We have framed the risk, and we have put it there. If this situation helps the leaderships, I mean, I'm talking about Milei and talking about Brazil at the same time, no, both with this absolutely different perspectives. I think that if they are successful in their economy, and other aspects of, and even in the electoral processes, that will reinforce these anti-migration policies, or the other way about. No? I think that that's also something that we need to see, because, of course, we cannot deny that migration is a tremendous issue in our world, but it's also a tremendously constructed issue that is shaping not only policies, but thoughts and ideologies and social perspectives in different countries.
And if I may just add another insert on the future of migration governance, I believe that migration governance will and should increasingly incorporate non-national actors in the system, especially when, as we are seeing this, retraction, if you will, from national actors in the space. And the reason for this is because migrants move to cities, for example, not a nebulous nation. They move into urban settlements, urban environments. And so cities are going to be on the front line of this conversations, even when nation states withdraw. Uh, Other or like subnational groupings, states in themselves, whether that's New York or California or other kind of regional arrangements, because migration is going to continue. And I think that there's increased focus on the role that cities and other regional and subnational actors can play in this.
I add something else. Uh, I think that that's a fantastic point, and I also want to add the importance of non-state actors in the reception and integration of refugees and migrants in general, no? Because they do the hard work. So I think that the state should be very, very careful in how they deal with these actors, because at the end, these are the people who are sustaining or not the migratory decisions that the governments are making.
Ernesto, Emmanuel, we could keep talking about this topic all day. There's so many things we didn't get to dive into, from the fact that we're seeing immigration not just from the global south to the global north, but global north into the global south, which is creating its own tensions, protests around gentrification in Mexico City, for instance. Um, Thank you all for staying tuned to Pan American Strategic Advisors Que Pasa series. We will continue to have these conversations and discuss what are the most pressing issues facing the Americas. So please stay tuned for more from us. Thank you so much, Ernesto, Emmanuel. Everyone, have a wonderful day.